everybody, I am Hiba Izzat. In this video I am going to explain how to use the correct terminology for samples and population, and I'm going to explain the common sampling methods, and finally I will describe how to find data and what are the most important data sources. At the beginning, we have to differentiate between two important terms, population and samples. A population is a term used to describe all the items included in your research or you are interested in. For example, for a company, all consumers of the product or service of this company are considered as the population for this company. However, if we are talking about a sample is a subset of the population. So, from all the consumers or customers of the company, we may select a sample, a fraction of the population. We call it a sample, in order to collect data about and we can analyze these data. Sometimes it's better to use census rather than sample. But what is a census? Sample involves looking only at some items selected from the population. As we have just mentioned, that sample contains or includes a small portion, a fraction of the whole population. But census is an examination of all items in a defined population. If we are collecting data about all items included in our population, in this case we are conducting a census. However, the accuracy of census is doubt or deceptive. How is that? There are many reasons include the extreme mobility of the population. The population, if for example we are collecting census data about Egyptian citizens, so we are counting the Egyptian citizens, we are counting all demographic data about Egyptian citizens. So if, for example, the population of Egyptians is about 100 million, in census we are collecting and counting the 100 million population. We are collecting data about the 100 million. These demographic data include gender, age, level of education, number of family members, number of dependents, and so on. The main problem with census in this case, extreme mobility of population. We mean by this that the number of citizens who are the residents on Cairo government is not fixed. How is that? Some of them may travel at weekends to other governorates in order to work or in order to visit their family and relatives. So sometimes the same individual may be counted more than one time in different geographic locations. Also, the other reason why census may be deceptive or have unreliable results is that some people don't want to be found. For example, if they are illegal residents or if they have committed illegal action. In this case, if the census worker come and try to collect data about this family or this individual, maybe this family will pretend that they already filled the application of the census in order to escape from giving their data and information. Another main reason of unreliable results of census are budget constraints. Due to budget constraints, maybe not all the families are visited. Also, there are many difficulties to train enough census field workers. The field workers are the persons who are moving around and go to different households in order to collect data about these households. Sometimes they are not well trained, and in this case, even if they collect the data, maybe they collect the data in a wrong way, or because they are not well trained, they may explain some questions in a wrong way or understand the answers of different individuals in different ways. Also, installing data, entering data, and securing this data is considered one of the main reasons why census may give us unreliable results. Sometimes also we may track incomplete responses or non-responses due to refusing of responses, or if the data collected from an individual contains missing values. In this case, the counting of this individual is considered very wrong, as it gives us incomplete data and information. So this table summarizes when or what are the situations that we may prefer samples over census or the reverse. Let's start with census. Situations where a census may be preferred. If we have a small population, so if we have inside a company 100 employees and we want to collect data about the work environment, we want to know if these employees are satisfied with the work environment of the company. As they are only 100 employees, it looks tedious of collecting a data of 50 or 70% from these 100. Also, sometimes if the required large sample or the sample size is large. So again, if we have 100 employee and we required that we are going to sample 70 or 80% of our employees, it also looks very tedious. Sometimes the database exists already. That's if the data are on desk, we can examine 100 of the cases. If the data already is collected and we need only to enter this data, it's not a good practice that we are going back and reselect a sample if we find that the size of the collected data is large and is required validating and auditing process. Sometimes banks must count all the cash. In this case, there are legal requirements, legal constraints. The bank should validate all the amount that enters to the safe. In this case, they cannot take a sample of the money collected at the bank and count this sample. They must collect or they must count all the money collected in order to perform their financial statements. Okay, so what are the situations that the sample looks to be a good choice for the researcher to start with? If we have an infinite population, if we are talking about Egyptian citizens, we are talking about a population that contains around 100 million people, and we want to know their opinion in some regulation or their level of happiness. Of course, it is not illogical that to collect data from the 100 million population. In this case, of course, sample is preferred. Collecting only 5% of the population or even less, the size of the sample is determined due to different factors that we will explain later. Sometimes the reason of selecting a sample is to destroy this sample. For example, if a car or a vehicle is tested for the safetiness, in this case, prior to the test, the expert knows that the car must go in certain high speed and the effect of crashing with a wall or with some object would be tested and observed. So in this case, the test won't be applied on the whole production. It will be applied on a specific number of the product in order to test its efficiency and effectiveness or for safety considerations. Of course, if we are going to collect data about population or conduct a census, this will require a lot of time. It will requires a lot of time. In this case, it's better to get the results of a sample, which in this case data collection and data analysis will be much faster than using or collecting data from the population or conducting a census. Accuracy of samples. Of course, there is some questioning in accuracy. Any data collection tool has some errors, but the accuracy of a sample is more than the accuracy of a census, because again in census we need many trained workers, many people to collect the data, many personnel to enter and analyze this data. However, if we have a limited number of objects that we need to collect data about, in this case everything is limited, and so the accuracy is higher. And of course, for the cost, collecting data of 1,000 people is less than the cost of collecting data about 100. So of course samples are saving money more than conducting census. Sometimes the data required for the collection is in a sensitive topic, like sexual harassment in work environment, or if the level of dissatisfaction of employees from their boss and something like this, it's better to the interviewer will set with a limited number of people that they are maybe representatives from different departments to discuss this situation with them. Of course, choosing between sample and census depends mainly on the purpose of the study. Also, it's very important to differentiate between two terms, which are parameters and statistics. Statistics here is the plural of the term statistic. In a previous video, we defined the statistic as a measure for some variable inside the sample. So here, if we are talking about the population consisting of n capital items, and we want to conduct or to measure some we want to calculate some measurements, such as the population mean or population proportion. In this case, we call this measurement a parameter. So parameter is a measurement or characteristic of the population, such as a mean or a proportion. And usually this parameter is unknown. It's unknown because again it's very hard to collect data about all items included inside the population. So if we wanted to estimate this parameter, we collect a sample. A sample is a subset, is a fraction, is a little number of items of the population. So if the sample contains n small items, we calculate different statistics for them, such as sample mean and sample proportion. So statistic is a numerical value calculated from a sample. Of course, the main purpose of calculating the statistic is to have some inference, to have some idea about or to estimate the unknown parameter of the population. We have different sampling methods. The way of selecting the fraction of the population, we have two ways. Either it's random or it's a non-random. If the sampling method is random, it means that we don't have any specific intention to choose certain items of the population. Random sampling methods include simple random sample, systematic sample, stratified sample, and cluster sample. The other type of sampling methods is non-random, and by its name there is some intention to select specific items inside the population. There are three types of non-random sampling, or three ways to select non-random samples: judgment sample, convenience sample, and focus groups. In the following, I am going to explain each one of them in more details. So in random sampling method, the first sampling way is simple random sample. In this case, we are using random numbers to select items from a list. So, for example, if we have Visa card holders, we may use some random generator programs to select which Visa holder will be selected. For example, if we want to draw a number between 0 and 10, there are many programs, many online programs that work for free, that you would enter the criteria, the range of numbers you want to select from. In this case, if we want to select from 0 and 10, using a random generator, a number we don't have any idea about in previous will be selected, or will be the output of this random generating process. So in a random process, you don't have any idea about the output of the selection process. The second way of random sampling method is the systematic sample. In this way, if you have a list that contains 100 people, and the researcher decided to select number 1 and then add 9 to this number, the result is number 10. So 10 will be selected. Again, add number 9, number 19 will be selected. Add number 9 again, so number 28 will be selected, and so on. So in this sampling way, there is some pattern or sequence in selecting the items included in the sample. It's considered also random because you don't know in advance which items will be selected. The criteria is programmed to be adding 9 to each number, but the results of this addition are unknown. The third type or method of random sampling is stratified sample. which is selecting randomly within defined strata. So here, for example, if we have the employees inside the company, and after conducting the random sample, the first random sample, we found that 80% of the sample items were male. However, we wanted to include also females equally inside the sample to have their opinion, because maybe they are dissatisfied with the work environment due to their family obligations and so on. So a wise way to do this is that if our sample, for example, is 30 employees, in this case we will collect, if the 50% of the employees are male and the other 50% are females, in this case we will divide our sample at the same fraction of the population to be 50% female and 50% male. This type is also still to be random. Why is that? Because the 15 female will be selected randomly from the 50 female, and the 15 male will also be selected randomly from the 50 male. Here what we did is only that they are random, but we wanted the fraction of gender inside the sample to represent the fraction of gender in the real population. Of course, we can apply stratified sample considering age. If we want to select, not all the sample items are from elderly people older than 60 years old. So in this case we may divide the sample that we should collect the same fraction that reflect the actual fraction of the population. This also applied on occupation. The fourth random sampling method is cluster sample. In cluster sample, we do like what we did in stratified sample, but here the selection criteria is according to geographical regions. So, for example, if we are collecting a sample of Egyptian citizens to know their opinion on a specific topic, in this case, and we want to select a sample of 50,000 people, in this case we will calculate the fraction of the population size in each governorate. So, for example, if there are 20% or 30% of the population residing in Cairo alone, in this case 30% of our sample will be selected from Cairo. 20% in Alex, in this case we will select 20 items of our sample in Alexandria, and so on. So here the classifying is according to the geographical region. The main idea of this is that maybe residents of some specific neighborhood, of some specific region, geographical region area, in this they would possess the same cultural behavior or the same beliefs and so on. So in this case, we are classifying the subjects of the sample according to geographical locations. The second method of sampling is non-random sampling. So here in this method, the random criteria is dimensioned. The first type is judgment sample, which is using expert knowledge to choose typical items. So for example, if the Ministry of Higher Education wants to investigate or wants to issue new regulation for the universities in Egypt. In this case, the Higher Ministry of Education would send for each university to give them an advice about who or which universities they should investigate on. So for example, if they found that there are a lot of state universities and many private universities, instead of taking the opinion of all of the private universities, they would take the opinion of some expert about which private universities that we can meet and we can take their opinion. So in this case, this process is not random at all. There is a pre-selection, and this pre-selection is due to the knowledge of some expert. Of course, here the choice may be subjective, because maybe the expert knows some universities or he is leaning towards some universities more than others. The second type of non-random sampling is convenience sample. This type or this way uses a sample that happens to be available. So sometimes if inside a restaurant and the manager wants to select the opinion of customers, sometimes they may give the customers, the ones who are already attending at the moment at the restaurant, the opinion cards to collect their opinion and their satisfaction level about the food and the cleanness of the restaurant and so on. So in this case, the manager would rely on the opinion of the already existing subjects of the population of customers. Also, if the professor is asking some of the attended students about their opinion about their opinion of the course and material and so on, and collected data from the attendees and ignoring the absent ones, in this case it's called a convenience sample. This type of sampling gives fast and rapid responses and results, but it may ignore the many of the absent subjects. For example, if the attendees represented small fraction of the total number of students, in this case the results of this sample may be misleading. The third way of non-random sampling is focus groups. In focus groups, in-depth dialogue with representative panel of individuals is collected. So again, if the university, one of the universities want to study the online experience, online teaching experience, so it decided to select from each module a student from each module to discuss the future of this method or future regulations, or how to organize the teaching and learning process. In this case, it's called a focus group, including people most likely don't know each other. They are different individuals, different students from different modules that would sit together to discuss the problem under investigation. Of course, to determine the sample size, there are many factors, and they are depend on the quality of the measure we want to obtain. Of course, when the size of the sample is large, in this case the measured statistic is more reliable than if the sample size is small. But the size of the sample depends mainly on three factors, which are the effort that will be paid to collect data and analyze this data, the cost of collecting large sample sizes, and also the time needed to collect data and process them. So the sample size is very important, and it can be determined by following different significance tests and different statistical measures that we will study later. After collecting the sample, of course, there are sources of error. There are many errors. These sources of errors may depend on the way of the data collection or the way of the sample was drawn. So some example of sources of errors will be non-response bias. If after collecting the data and analyzing them, the researcher found that the non-respondents or the incomplete responses, all of them hold the same characteristic that doesn't exist in respondents. So, for example, if all who respond to the data collection process are the ones who are aged 60 plus. So in this case, the non-respondents who all of them are less than 60 years old, this may refer that the way of collecting the data has a problem of collecting data from these strata, and this may produce unreliable results because they are not represented inside the sample. The second source of error is selection bias. In some cases, if the data intended to be collected by a random method, and selection happened due to some personal preferences, in this case there is a bias due to the selection process. Also, sometimes the respondents give false information. This may cause response error. For example, if the data collected for the purpose of knowing some of the personal attitudes, and it contains questions like how many times you wash your hands on a daily basis. So the respondent wants to seem that he is very tidy and clean. In this case, he would mention the maximum number mentioned inside the questionnaire. For example, if the responses are never wash my hand, never wash my hand 3 times, 5 times, 10 times a day, to look as he's a very clean person, he may choose 10 times a day, though he may be never wash his hands. So sometimes the respondents give false information in order to make their appearance be good and nice. The third error is coverage error. In this error, maybe the population is not defined correctly. The population, if we are dealing or if we are collecting data about customers of a specific company, sometimes maybe customers of other companies included within the sample, and this is considered due to bad definition of the actual population of the study. Also, some errors may happen during the measurement process, which is if the survey used to collect the data contains questions that could be understood differently from one individual to another. In this case, the difference in responses happened due to the misunderstanding of the wording of the question, and in this case we have measurement errors. Also, sometimes the error is due to the interviewer. When the interviewer is trying to influence the interviewee. So sometimes the interviewer is very excited about the topic, and he has or she has previous hypotheses that about this topic, and when he is conducting the interview, he wants to affect the interviewee to select certain answers, so to prove that the pre-assumed hypothesis or theory is correct. So sometimes the interviewer would affect or influence the answers and responses of the interviewee. Finally, there is some sampling error which happen randomly without any intention, like instead of having 30% of the data collected from a specific location, like Cairo for example, one of them was traveling between governorates, so data collected about him mistakenly without knowing that he is not one of the residents of this location. So in this case, it's called a sampling error that happened without any intention. And these types of error or these kinds of errors are unavoidable and are random, and it has a certain dealing with while the data is analyzed. Of course, it's very important, after knowing the types of data, levels of measurement, how data can be collected is very important. What are different sources of data? The first source which is considered and increasingly available to everyone, to every researcher, to every student, is the web. We have here different examples of web used for data collection. First, we have Central Agency for Central Mobilization and Statistics, the CAB-MAS, which is the main responsible for conducting a census in Egypt. In this website, you can find all the data related to demographics, work, employment, unemployment rate, education, and levels of literacy, and so on. The second source of data collection is using books and published articles, and for this we have Knowledge Bank of Egypt. It's a very rich portal that contains many international recognizable journals that is included in Thomson Reuters database and in Scopus database, and also it contains thousands of books. The third source or website we can find data on is the World Bank database. In World Bank database we can find in the indicators, social indicators, economic indicators, political indicators worldwide. Also, we have the International Labour Organization website that contains any statistics and databases about labor and employment. We also have different webs and database portals like Google, Yahoo, and MSN. For financial indexes and the stock market data, we can use finance.yahoo.com. For world demographics, all data related to demographics worldwide, we have the demographia.com. And finally, we have World Health Organization or WHO that has all information related to health and healthcare. Of course, this is a very small sample of the real websites and real databases resources that can be found on the internet. Another way of collecting data, another source for data, is by conducting survey. And most of the surveys are following the 6 or the 8 steps, the following 8 steps. First of all, before conducting the survey, the goal of the research must be specified very clearly. Then the budget for this survey must be determined according to time and money and the availability of staff. Then the design of the survey must be set by setting what is defining very clearly what is the target population, who are the subjects that composing all the population, how can we define them, what will be the sample size, according to what criteria this sample size is specified. Then at choosing, we need to collect and to select a survey type and method. There are many different survey types. Then the designing a data collection an instrument, which is questionnaire. Survey is the way of the collecting data, but questionnaire is the tool that is used to collect data from the subjects. Of course, after designing the questionnaire, a pre-test must be conducted many times in order to be very specific that no question can be misunderstood or can be understood in different ways. Of course, any updates, any changes to the survey would be added, and at the end, the way of coding the data and entering the data and analyzing the data should be identified. The common types of surveys are either sending the questionnaire by mail. Of course, this type of surveying may have very few responses, or the data can be collected by telephone. A customer service agent can call the interviewee by the telephone, try to collect the data, but this type also is considered as very poor because it has low responses and it is targeting specific people, maybe the residents of some geographical region. Also, the survey or the data collected can be used by interviews. Interviews has two main problems. The first one is that the interviewer can influence the responses of the interviewee. The second is subjective because sometimes the interviewer misunderstand the words of the interviewee. Also, we have the web. By using the web, online forms can be used in order to have responses and collect data. And of course, another way is direct observation, which is the way that is followed mostly in social sciences experiment, economic experiment, or in some psychology lab to watch the behavior of the subject by imposing him to certain situation and observe the attitude and the behavior of the subject. Thank you for watching the video.